Hey there, Meidas Canada viewers, Meidas Mighty from all over the globe. Charlie Angus here in the snowy hills of northern Canada. On today's episode, we are going to talk about the very dangerous position the world is in and the people of Ukraine face as Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin attempt to sell the people of Ukraine out. You know, I feel sometimes like Cassandra in my 60s. I came of age and as a teenager fighting for peace. I've spent my whole life fighting for peace, showing that there's a better way than a new Cold War of remilitarization, and yet we are watching the world descend into what is the beginning of a new global conflict. And part of stopping that is about holding the line, and we have to hold the line in Ukraine, my friends. We're going to talk about that. Before we get into the subject of the American traitor at the heart of this, and Donald Trump is the American traitor, the number one Russian asset that the Russians have dreamed of having for so long. I want to just share some of the good news stories, the resistance that we're seeing everywhere. I got this great message from Ian Patrick about the recent town hall we held in Victoria that we showed. And he said, watching Charlie and Victoria from my home in Halifax, I live closer to Dublin, Ireland than Victoria, British Columbia. Canada is immense, but Charlie reminds us that it is home to all of us. A wonderful reminder that instills pride, security, and courage. Thank you, Charlie. Well done. Here's one from R. Roche, who says, thank you so much, Charlie, for your great work and your continuing journey on promoting and defending democracy in this great country. My dad, as a resistance member, fought the Nazis in Norway in World War II. Resistance equals victory and freedom. Resist, resist, resist. Thank you, R. Roche, for that. This is what we're doing here. There is an urgency in telling stories of resistance because we need to be built up this sense that we can push back against the gangsters now more than ever. This is from Jim Fromm. Good morning, Charlie. Mugs up, elbows up. In America, we have hundreds of creators who engage the daily news in their studios. But what is sorely needed, and what I admire about you, is that you are going town to town, city to city, province to province, delivering a message of hope and unity. We have Bernie, Canada has Charlie. Your views may differ, but the message of the importance of the common man and the common good is one of courage and patriotism that demands respect. There is a song about a young man standing by his father's bedside, and near the end he says, "Close your eyes, Dad, rest. It's my turn to keep the monsters away." Thank you for being on watch. Thank you for watching over our sons and daughters, who because of you will know the importance of watching over us. Wow. Thank you so much for that. We're still getting great responses to our piece at Molly's Reach and the famous Greasy Spoon where the TV show The Beachcombers was. And Texel Micro writes, I think it's important to mention that one of the cast of The Beachcombers, Robert Clothier, that's the famous relic of the show, he flew 2 tours operationally with 408 Squadron RCAF. Yeah, Robert Clothier flew Lancasters with the Canadian Air Force. He was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross on December 5th, 1944. He was a resistance fighter. Well, you know, Relic, thank you for your service, and I think it's worth remembering that. Arundel QC says, good morning, Charlie. You are now how I start the day, sitting down with a fresh cup of coffee and going on Charlie Angus. Thank you for your inspiration. It's working. I really appreciate reading the sharings and pairings of fellow resistors. This is an authentic place for starting conversations and sharing our common experiences. Stories matter. They do matter. That's why we tell them, and these connections together keep us knowing that we're not isolated from one another. And I have this one. I love traveling with you, Charlie. Keep up the good work. Elbows up, Canada, from an American, Kay McGowan. Thank you so much for that, Kay. Okay, let's get to today's show. Donald Trump is threatening the people of Ukraine with a deal that is not a peace deal. This is about selling off Ukraine and the Ukrainian democracy and the Ukrainian resistance for spare parts to satisfy Vladimir Putin. He's demanding that Ukraine give up its sovereign territory that Russia hasn't even taken, that they agree to completely cut their military defense, and that they no longer rely on the West. You know, Marx said that history happens the first time as tragedy and the second time as farce. And the first time was at Munich 1938, when Hitler and Chamberlain decided to carve up Czechoslovakia in the idea that they would create peace. And so what they did, without the people of Czechoslovakia having any say in this, was carve off serious sections of the country, which left Czechoslovakia completely defenseless when a year later, Hitler decided to take the whole nation. That's exactly what Vladimir Putin's plan is in Ukraine. To take that land, to break the Ukrainian military down, to get them to agree to that, while the West walks away. I just want to say right now that many of the Western leaders are in Johannesburg in South Africa. Our Prime Minister, Mark Carney's there. You know, I've been writing some stuff where I'm going to be really taking Mark Carney on his failure on the environment, on his failure to see the need to stand up to the pipeline lobbyists who are going to be undermining our country at every turn they can. But the fact that our Prime Minister is in Johannesburg right now, he's representing us. And the West is in Johannesburg, despite the fact that Donald Trump is demanding that people don't go to South Africa because of his racist attitudes. The West are meeting in South Africa, and they're meeting to talk about Ukraine. We need the West to hold the line right now. But I want to talk about what's underlying all of this, is the fact that Donald Trump has been the traitor asset of the Russians for 40-some years, and it's been there in plain sight. Everyone's seen it. And yet nobody in the American intelligence network, nobody in the American political network, nobody in the American legal system seemed to care. How is it possible that this convicted predator and sexual felon was allowed to dismantle American foreign policy to the point that the United States is becoming a puppet of Vladimir Putin's international ambitions? So let's talk about the Putin-Trump relationship, Trump's obligations he owes the Russians, and his determination to break the people of Ukraine. You know, Luke Harding, in his book Collusion, writes that the Russian Secret Service began a file on Donald Trump dating back to 1977. By 1984, Trump was starting to make announcements that he wanted to negotiate with the Russians, that he thought he could deal with them, and that he could set up this sort of the United States and Russia together, taking on the rest of the world. People thought it was ridiculous at the time, but the Russians were already beginning to move in on Trump's economic and political world. The first deals that Trump were making were pretty low rent. He was buying TVs at a discount for Trump Tower out of what was apparently a KGB front operation in New York. The first of the Russian mobsters to move in was David Bogatin, who was tied to the Mogilevich crime syndicate. He bought 5 units for, at the time, the outrageous amount of $6 million. That should have been a major red flag to American intelligence. Bogatin was later tied to Russian money laundering, and Trump Tower became the focal point for so much dirty money. Ivashlev Ivankov, who was tied to gambling, prostitution, arms smuggling, he set himself up in Trump Tower. In 2013, the FBI broke a major gambling and money laundering ring in Trump Tower, in the apartment right below Donald Trump's headquarters. The FBI officer who led the investigation and charged those 29 men tied to the Russian mob was later fired by Donald Trump. Trump, by the early 1990s, had bottomed out. Mr. Great Success Story. He couldn't get any money. He owed billions. And that's when he started to get these bank deals. Deutsche Bank began to offer money. Deutsche Bank was notorious for being a cleaning house for Russian laundered money. Russian assets began to buy up real estate. They say that in some locations up to 30% of Trump's real estate was being purchased by these offshore unknown entities, most likely tied to Russian oligarchs and the Russian mob. they started to reel Trump into Russia. First in 1987, he got an invite to come and visit. At that point, he was being invited by Intourist, which Viktor Suvorov, a former KGB agent, said Intourist was the long-standing KGB entrapment machine, so they'd invite you over. And what does he say? He said, oh, it's quite the story. He said, yeah, everything's free. There are good parties with nice girls. It could be a sauna and girls and who knows what else. Everything was under 24-hour control with security cameras on. And their interest was only one thing, to collect information and use that information in the future. We see in 2013, Trump was invited over to be part of the Miss Universe competition. He acted like he had put this whole thing on. In fact, Russian oligarch money paid for it, paid him to come over. This was the second time he was over there. And major Russian monitoring of his activities took place because the Russians have something they call kompromat. It's like getting dirt on somebody. They get dirt on their finances. They get dirt on their extramarital affairs. And hey, if you want to stay in one of the top suites in Moscow and act like a crazy pervert, they're going to be filming you. So in 2016, Christopher Steele, who was the head of the Russia desk for MI6, who then went to work in the private sector, was asked to do an analysis, a risk analysis of Trump running for president. And the Steele dossier was a staggering indictment of Trump's compromising relationships with the Russians, his money relationships, and that, of course, there's the so-called the P video, serious Russian compromat. And Steele was a major source for both the U.S. intelligence, the British and European intelligence for understanding Russia. And yet when the Steele dossier came out, the American media, said it wasn't true, said it was outrageous, said it was crazy, just like they said that about the allegations of Trump and Epstein. They weren't interested. They were way more interested in Hillary Clinton's emails than the really dirty questions of Trump's compromising behavior in Russia and his relationship with Russian money. In 2016, we saw that the Russians began to openly advocate to get him elected. One of the conduits for this Russian election connection was Felix Sater, another guy tied to the Mogilevich mob, a man who had been convicted for his work with the mob, who set himself up in Trump Tower and began doing real estate deals with Trump, and then bragged that he was going to work with Vladimir Putin to get Trump elected. There was the notorious meeting in 2016 in Trump Tower with Jared Kushner, key members of Trump's electoral campaign, and Russian operatives, where they offered a dossier on Hillary Clinton. But apparently at that meeting, they also had another dossier they put on the table, which is the dossier they had on Donald Trump, and they expected Donald Trump to behave. Major members of Trump's electoral team, George Papadopoulos, Michael Flynn, Cohen, Manafort, were tied to Russian interests. And one of them was Carter Page, Trump's foreign policy advisor, who was totally pro-Kremlin, who flew over to Moscow just prior to the 2016 Cleveland Convention, came back, and one of the first things they did at that convention was to kill a motion that would have supported Ukraine. So we see that Trump is deeply embedded with Russian interests. He is a survivor economically and politically because of Russian money. And his focus on destroying Ukraine has been clear from the get-go. As soon as he came into power, he began cutting off aid for Ukraine. He began cutting off intelligence. He cut off intelligence networks in the United States trying to track Russian cyber war against the United States. He was selling out his own people while he was doing this, all in plain view. Most of Trump's major team in 2016 were later charged and convicted for their ties or for lying about their ties to the Russians. James Comey, who is not the greatest FBI director ever, Trump fired him for refusing to back off in the investigation of Michael Flynn. And the day after Trump fired him, Trump met with senior Russian diplomats and foreign advisors of Putin in the White House, and Trump bragged about firing Comey. It's all been there, my friends. It's all been there right before our eyes. So the question is what are we going to do about it? It is crucial that the West stand together at this time. It is crucial. Whether there's going to be a NATO or not is going to depend on whether there's a Ukraine or not. And if Ukraine falls, then the Baltic falls. Canada is certainly online because we see the constant threat and undermining of Canada by the gangster regime in Washington. So our interests are very, very much tied up with the people of Ukraine. I want to just end on this from Timothy Snyder, who's one of the great experts on fascism in history, and his book on freedom. And he writes that Donald Trump is a construct of Russian money and a construct of Russian political influence. He says, Trump only had a platform because Americans associated with the successful businessman that he played on television, a role which was only possible because Russians bailed him out. Fiction rested on fiction, rested on fiction. From the Russian perspective, Trump was a failure who was rescued and an asset to be used to wreak havoc in American reality. Trump, the winner, was a fiction that would make his country lose. We have to call out that fiction. If the American political and media and intelligence community are going to go along with Trump selling out his nation as a traitor, it falls to the rest of us. It falls to Canada. It falls to the Western allies. It falls to Australia, New Zealand, Japan, all the rest of the world to work together to hold the line and stop the gangsters. That's where we're at, my friends. So thank you for today's show. I want to follow up. This Thursday, we're doing a Meidas Town Hall at the Paradise Theatre with West End Phoenix in Toronto. There are some tickets still available. There's a lot of buzz about this event. November 28th, I will be with the Grievous Angels, my band, at the Kafana in Belleville. It's a very tiny place, and it's a Ukrainian resistance center of great food, of great music, and we are going to be doing a fundraiser for Ukraine at the Kafana in Belleville. November 30th, we've sold out our show at the Rainbow Bistro in Ottawa. We've added a second Grievous Angels show. Tickets are on sale. They're going fast. So the second show, doors open at 7. So, hey, it's not a late night. Honest to God. Come on down if you're in the nation's capital. And December 14th, there are still tickets for the matinee for the Grievous Angels Christmas show at the Horseshoe Tavern, December 14th. Tickets still available. Anyways, keep kicking at the darkness, my friend. These are dark, dark times, but together we will make it bleed daylight. Thank you. Merci et miigwech.